talk about is really aligning to the business. The subtitle of my presentation is Security by Design, why does it fail? And the idea behind this is that if we look at how a lot of organizations go through and try to build the wall around the things we're trying to protect, we just really, all we have is, okay, I want to build the best wall I can. I want to protect everything I've got, all my assets equally, and so forth. And if we, just continue with that kind of mentality, a lot of times we're going to build a really, really good wall in some areas that people can just walk right around and get to the assets that we really need to protect. And we'll talk about some, I'll try not to name any companies by name, but we'll talk about some case studies that we've seen in the industry, customers that I've talked to, and so forth, and how those challenges have really led us to write this, this book, Security Battleground, which is really to provide the security professional and the executives that are responsible for security to align business better with security, right? Or security better with business. So why am I saying, standing up here, saying security, kind of is missing the mark as far as aligning to business and, our natural design of security, why does it fail? Well, if I look at kind of the state of our industry, and we did a number of surveys when we set out to write this book. We did a number of surveys with customers and in different areas, defense, finance, corporations that were trying to protect a lot of intellectual property and so forth. And we found that, okay, well, overall, things looked really good, right? The defense area, network was getting an A+, A-, endpoint, a B. The lowest grade we got was really in mobile, right? So they're grading themselves, saying, okay, well, as far as our defenses and security and so forth, really the only thing that we're not doing as well as maybe we'd like is a C in mobility. In the finance industry, very similar marks. The lowest they gave themselves was a B in mobile and endpoint, right, protections. If we go on and look at more IP-centric organizations where the range of industries vary a lot, but what they're really concerned with was protecting their intellectual property. They did give themselves a D in mobility. Mobility is a new area, changing all the time. I would say that the industry overall, maybe a C, C- is at best what we're doing in mobility in most places. But the one thing, if you see this, it sounds like we're doing a great job overall as an industry, right? But if you ask a different question, which is protection for the future, everybody's like, yeah, I don't have that warm and fuzzy, right? I don't know what I don't know. And I don't know what the upcoming threats are, the new vectors that people are going to use, a lot of concern around advanced persistent threats, things of that nature that, we're just not sure, right? Yesterday I was doing the talk for the high schools, doing the online safety for teens and so forth, and going through all the things. And it was a very computer savvy high school, and I was actually doing it for their computer department and so forth. So of the 150 kids that I talked to, they were kind of glazing over because all the stuff I said was really old hat stuff that they had been taught about and told about before. But the one thing that really got their attention was the 150,000 bots or zombies that are created daily, right? That's one of the estimations that our labs groups have. And so, that goes to, we don't know what we don't know yet, right? So I think that leads to the sphere of the future protection. So then, and this is kind of the thing that I don't really know how this fits into my presentation exactly, because it's not really talking about how we're failing in the security aligning to business, but it's really talking about the attacker and being able to go in and go after our crown jewels, whatever it is, whether it's our reputation, our intellectual property, our customer data, whatever that they're trying to get, they're able to go in and they're able to do that through trial and error, right? So they're able to go in and watch any kind of attack, or any kind of exploit, and so forth. And if we in the security department stop that, great, we get a star or a check plus or whatever on that particular event, but we're not coordinating that to show that we're better protected, right? It's, if we think about the olden days, anytime I think about security and I talk about this kind of presentation, I always think about, a castle. And if I'm storming the castle, as long as I don't get killed, if I don't get in, I can go back and I can reformulate my thoughts and I can try again a different way, right? And this is kind of the attacker's mindset, right? So they can go and they can try something, and if it works, great. They own the machine, they start their low and slow attack, or what have you. But if it doesn't work, they can always go back, and what they've done is they've learned that, okay, well, this company has this type of defense. So I know that I need to, instead of go after the drawbridge that's pulled up, I can't get across the moat, well, maybe I need to go around to the side and see if I can get up the wall somehow. So in today's world, we need to apply more of an orchestrated defense, right? And this applies a lot more to technology than planning necessarily. So I want to, if I stop something with my IPS or I stop something with my antivirus endpoint, I want to notify other things, and I want to be more intelligent, be able to take corrective measures, not only at the endpoint, but then because I stop something at the endpoint, I know a lot of information. I know where that originated from, what IP address it originated from, and so forth. It'd be good to have my firewall, my IPS, or my web gateway to take some additional action based on the event that I stopped at my firewall. At my endpoint. Also, if something happens at my endpoint, I know I possibly can know a lot about what it was trying to do, right? And so it'd be good to know everywhere else in my network if that had happened already on another endpoint, right? If we know that something was going to happen on my endpoint and possibly it was going to make changes, let's say just to a registry setting, it'd be great to know that if that registry setting had already been compromised anywhere else in my network and be able to defend against that. And those are all things, and I won't talk a lot about that today. I really won't talk much more about that, but those are all things from a technology standpoint that is great that we need to plan for and so forth. But let's get back on track and talk a little bit more about the failure by design when we're looking at security, right? So this is, again, back to those surveys we were doing and talking to our customers and interviews and so forth. And we found that 40% of our customers and people that we were talking to on average did not have a executive security plan, right? And what we really found, even more so, that's people that are willing to admit, no, we don't have an executive strategy or executive plan. What we found even more than that 40%, a large number of the customers that said, okay, well, here's our, our executive plan and so forth, it was really more of a technology gap analysis, right? So, in the upcoming year, I'm planning to deploy web gateway and whitelisting and single sign-on. And those are the projects that I have because we've done gap analysis, and those are areas that we have challenges and so forth, technology-wise. But none of that is driving towards what the business needs us to protect, right? And we're building a great wall, right? So we want to secure what we can in our environment. We want to protect as much of our environment as possible. But if we're not protecting the right things, well, we're not doing justice for our security organization. Think about, I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and, my parents live in kind of a rural area, and my father likes cars. And not really, not to offend anybody who's an MG enthusiast here, but not really cool cars. He's a big fan of the MG, little, British convertible thing. Not very expensive and stuff, but he has a lot of them, right? Some of them are pretty nice, and they're in the garage and stuff, and under lock and key, and somebody wanted to steal something off of one of those, they'd actually have to break into the garage and steal stuff, right? But he has others that are a little bit rougher, that are in different stages, and they're in the yard, right? And they're under tarps and so forth, and you wouldn't have to be a grand larcenist, super villain to get in there and take parts off of one of these MGs that's in the yard. So, if my dad wanted to secure his assets, he's done it the right way, right? He could build a really elaborate wall and gate system and put up security cameras and so forth and protect these, $800 parts cars that are out in his, backyard. Or he could spend the money on, the alarm system for the garage and so forth, which is not nearly as much, right? Sorry for the lame analogy, but does that make sense? So, also to this failure by design, a lot of times we've introduced this concept of the obligated executive, the security obligated executive, right? And who is that? Well, that's our boss from the the CISO's boss, who he's concerned about security, and he's responsible for our assets. If we lose something or have a breach or some kind of event that we have to, declare publicly or make restitution to customers or any of those things, he's on the hook for, right? But he's not trained in security, right? He doesn't know what all the proper controls are, or all the necessary steps, or what should be escalated and what shouldn't be, and all the different things from that perspective. So, but what he does understand is strategic planning, right? So hopefully, if he's escalated to where he's a CIO or CEO, whoever we're reporting into, he understands the business. He understands, all right, well, he understands budgeting and what we need to do in order to, make profit for our company and so forth, and protect ourselves and make sure that, the lawyers are doing the right things and all of that. But there isn't any kind of roadmap, right? If we go out and we go to the security section of our local bookstore, which I realize are few and far between now, but if we go to Amazon and we look for things, there's 10 major firewall vendors and 3,300 books on how to configure them. But there's very few books on, okay, well, how do I plan my security strategy? Right? So let's go and let's look at, okay, well, what are the challenges that I have if I'm a CISO? Well, if I go in, and these are based on numerous real examples of customers that we talked to. In the book, there's some real life examples where some of our executives on the SE side of the house are going in, they're talking to the executives or the CISOs and the executives over them and so forth. And this is what they found. It's like, okay, well, I don't think my CISO is doing a good job because we're getting all these escalations and so forth, and it seems like, all I see is the duck paddling underwater. I don't see the nice calm duck on the surface of the water, and I have all these challenges and so forth. And I just really don't think they have a handle on things in the security organization, right? So, if I'm the CIO and I see just all this, all the time we're dealing with, possible outbreaks and breaches and so forth. Well, from one hand, I'm not doing a good job because I don't have that I have a lack of trust. I don't think that they're really, I shouldn't have to see all this stuff. I don't want to know how the sausage is made necessarily. But from a second perspective, if I look at the second paradox is, all right, well, we go into a shop and we talk to the security department and they seem like they got everything under control. In the book, we refer to it as almost arrogance, right? That, things can't happen in our network, our IPS is tuned great, we're automatically blocking, we're doing all these different things. They seem like they're flexible in a lot of regards, but they're not really. And in this case, the CISO is really, they got a quiet security environment. They really don't seem to have that many problems and so forth. But they're really just one breach away from, having to hit the bricks. Right? So neither of these situations are what we want. We really want a security environment that is like the situation number one, but we want to make sure that the CIO, the management above us, are educated to what's going on, what to expect, what kind of things that we need to be protected and so forth. And in order to do that, we really need to be in line with the business, right? We need to understand what we need to protect, what the cost of not protecting something is, and make sure that we're applying controls that do just that, right? That we're actually protecting the database that we need to protect versus all of the databases. In the kind of the event of my dad's cars, he's protecting the cars that he needs to protect, not all the cars, right? So, the kind of now that we're going into a woodworking analogy, but I need to have, my tenons lined up to where I am building the wall to protect what the business needs me to protect. There was a breach, a large gaming manufacturer. I'm sure that you guys are all aware of this. It happened a couple of years ago where they lost a ton of information from some very critical databases around personal information for online gaming and so forth, credit cards and the like. So McAfee was involved with some of the after the fact investigation and so forth, and we've worked very closely with this company. They're not short on budget, right? They're not short on security. So we're kind of scratching our heads going, okay, thinking, well, what should have been done? What should have been protected and so forth? And they had something like $14 million allocated for the protection of all databases across the organization. Whereas what they really needed was to implement about, 100 grand, 50 something grand worth of protection for this really, really important database. Right? And so it was a case where security just wasn't closely enough in the loop about, where in this case, a very important set of crown jewels were, and it lined up just perfectly with, an exploit that was available and someone that was looking to exploit that, right? So, coupled those three things together, and this company, had a huge PR nightmare, right? Because they had to disclose this. They had to do all the, the proper restitution and remediation around helping take care of customers, right? The credit monitoring, the mailings to everybody, about, okay, well, you may have been involved with this particular security breach. Here's credit monitoring for you, and all the different things at an astronomical cost. So, if you've seen a McAfee presentation in the past, probably 6 or 7 years, you've seen a version of this graph. And this is something that we've worked extensively on, to kind of map security to a maturity model, just like an ITIL or anything like that. And what we found with customers and how much they're spending on security budgets, we found that as they move from reactive through compliant and proactive, eventually to optimize, that they, of course, spend more money as they go through the process, but as they get to an optimized state, they are winding up spending less OpEx and CapEx expenses on security because they're doing things the right way. We're not just building a big wall, we're building the right wall and a wall that's working together. So, reactive, and I'm just going to use an example of like an IPS, right? So when I'm looking at the reactive stage in relation to my IPS, that might mean that my IPS may only be in IDS mode. It's not even doing blocking. But when I get an event, every event, I kind of have to do some kind of manual reactive evaluation on whether or not it's important and whether or not I need to do something with it. So that's kind of the reactive stage. As I go to compliant, well, maybe now I've moved into an IPS blocking mode. When I get a high critical event, a high level alert event, I then do a process to make sure that I track that down to closure so I don't have any kind of compliance or audit issues going on, right? So I'm hitting compliance buttons. Proactive stage, I've moved, I'm still doing the stuff for compliance, but now I've added in asset management and vulnerability information into integration with my IPS, and I'm able to do some sort of automatic correlation to know if my current countermeasures help me out any. But then finally, in optimized stage, I'm doing all that stuff that I was doing from a reactive, proactive, and compliance level, but now I'm able to block stuff automatically. I'm able to identify other problems in my network based on events. I'm able to notify my endpoint of challenges that have happened on my IPS. And because of that, and being able to do it more in an automated fashion, I'm able to reduce my costs, right? I don't have as many people having to do things manually and so forth. So let's go in and let's look at kind of the overall contents of the security battleground. This is kind of the almost the table of contents of the book. But there's really the three areas. The first is kind of the early stages of planning. We call it the field manual for the battleground. The second area is preparing for the battle. And then finally is the winning the war in the third column. And so if we kind of walk through and look at the first stage of this, surveying the battleground, this is kind of giving us a starting point of looking, all right, well, where are we at? Where do I need to start as far as where my organization is? And as I go through and I look at assessing mission readiness, that's looking at my security organization and how they're handling their daily tasks, and are we actually doing a reactive, proactive, compliant job and so forth. Developing the strategy, I'm actually beginning to look at my strategic planning and what I need to do to align business to my security strategy. The second column is really what we're calling prepping for battle. And this is where we get into an exercise that we call the 3 R's. And that's riches, ruin, and regulation. And so if we look at the line of business and bring the line of business into our discussions for planning, and we look at, okay, how can someone get rich off of us, right? So if they're going to steal something, what is it? And that might be, employee or customer data, it might be intellectual property, it might be anything that we want to protect from a data exploitation standpoint. Ruin, it could be a combination of they might be able to get rich off of it, but it might just be simple things like, denial of service type attacks. So they, if they can't get into our banking website, well, they'll move on to somebody else's bank, right? You get frustrated enough with your whoever you're dealing with, and you can't, actually access their site. Eventually, you say, okay, well, I will move on. It might be, stealing intellectual property and being able to do corporate espionage type thing. It could be press releases. There was a company that this was, they were doing off-premise press releases. So they had sent a press release about their latest earnings to their PR firm and so forth. And the PR firm lost a little bit of that data accidentally, which then caused a ton of short selling on their stock before the public announcement and so forth. So it caused a lot of market cap loss in that case, as well as a lot of just image loss, right? From the standpoint of, okay, well, was this done on purpose to protect, big institutional traders and so forth? So there's a lot of that. So those are the types of things that can, ruin us, right? So riches, ruins, and then finally regulation. There's very few industries today that don't have some sort of government or industry regulation and compliance that they have to meet. So those are things that have to factor in to our security practice, right? There's a large retailer in Canada that we worked with in the past with PCI compliance and so forth, and they did the analysis and they were like, okay, well, we'll just take the fine, right? So they were like, this is how much it's going to cost us to implement the proper controls. This is what it's going to cost us to not, right, to pay the fine and so forth. And so they went with, okay, we're going to implement the least number of controls that we have to and maintain those, and we'll just pay the fine, right, in that case. Not something that I'm standing in the room suggesting you do, but it is something that you need to prioritize each of your security risk factors with to make sure that we're aligning to the proper implementation and prioritization of security controls according to the business. The last column is really, okay, well, how do we win the war, right? When we get things like funding war, and a lot of times it isn't what we ask for as security professionals up the chain and through the line of business to track budget, but it's how we ask for it. If we go and we say, okay, well, we've got these 8 projects that we need to do this year, and that's probably too many. We've got 3 projects we need to do. Let's go back to that, web gateway, whitelisting, and new enterprise firewall. So those are things that we're going to implement this year. And we go and we try to get funding during the budget cycles and so forth. And it's, whatever it is, $3.4 million OPEX and CAPEX over the next 2 years that we need to implement these budgets, these projects. Well, if we just present that, the board of directors and the executives are going to look at it from, okay, well, what's the risk, right? And they're going to want to know, okay, well, what's the damage to the business that we've done, and so forth. And they're going to look at it strictly from a cost per project basis if they don't have all the necessary information. And they will understand that if the web gateway is more important than the firewall or the whitelisting project, what are they actually protecting? What are the line of business, the crown jewels, the data that we're protecting in each of those cases? So if we were to go and get in line with the business and submit a budget plan for protecting our critical databases, or protecting our websites with customer information, or protecting our servers from a whitelisting standpoint, and what those actually contain, and what the risk is if we were to have an exploit or a breach in one of those areas, it'd be much more compelling, and they can make the smart business decisions based on that. And it's much easier to get that funding, right? The next one, measuring success. In the book, it goes into great detail about what are the types of metrics that we need to collect and present to different areas of the business. Executives are interested in things like, how many breaches have I had, and how much does each breach cost? Whereas operations might be more concerned with where am I at on vulnerabilities, percentage of vulnerabilities that I've patched for, and so forth, versus, if I give that to an executive, okay, well, what does that mean, right? That doesn't help me do my job, and so forth. So I want to make sure that I'm presenting the right information to the right people. And then, of course, it talks about avoiding the pitfalls of, trying to measure too much or not enough. And I've got in my notes, this is a great quote in the book, everything that can be counted does not necessarily count, and everything that counts can not necessarily be counted. Anyone know who said that? I bring y'all interactive.
Johnston.
No, good guess. Albert Einstein. So, it's one of those things that, when we're gathering metrics, especially in the security world, it's hard to quantify everything that we need to, but the book gives us a great outline of things that you might want to present to the right level of people. And then, of course, managing the crisis talks about, containing an outbreak, what we need to do to remediate it, and the steps there. Aligning the allies is, both internally and externally. Our corporate assets, they usually don't stop inside of our brick and mortar building anymore, right? We've got supply chains, we've got partners that are impacted by any kind of possible breach that we might have, or we're impacted by a breach that they might have, and so forth. And we need to make sure that we're aligning those allies, understanding both internally and externally who those are. And then, of course, future-proofing. Back to the scorecards at the beginning where, everybody kind of gave themselves an F for being able to protect themselves in the future. This is impacted by a number of different things, right? We put together a plan, but the plan needs to be reevaluated constantly. Threats are changing and need to be reevaluated probably on a quarterly basis, or at least a biannual basis that we're going through and looking at, are we protecting for the latest and greatest threats? From a line of business standpoint, we probably get by with, annually reevaluating, well, what are the new projects and what are the things that we're needing to protect against? Things that impact that, of course, are, if we move into a new geo through mergers and acquisition, maybe there's new regulations that we need to deal with. As we look at, the change in the IT landscape, things like cloud computing, where we do public cloud, private cloud, virtualization, the consumerization of IT, where we're moving towards having more and more of our employees bring their own computers, tablets, and cell phones into the corporate space, right? Here at McAfee, we have a great IT department that supplies us with, pretty much any kind of equipment that you want from a, personal computer standpoint, or, phone and so forth. But I also, all my guys are highly technical, and they're constantly bringing in the latest and greatest gadget and, hooking it up to the corporate network, right? And, the risk of, if they lose one of those in the airport or something, we need to make sure that those are protected and so forth in line with the business. So as we go through this, I want to introduce the concept of that 3 R's, the riches, ruins, and regulation. And this is something that, we call it a game and book or a role-playing book. And the idea is that we want to bring the line of the business into the security planning. So we want to make sure that we go through and let the line of business play hacker, not on the keyboard, but help walk us through and answer the questions about, all right, Mr. Line of Business owner, what does somebody want, right? What's important? I can protect your data, but what's the important data? We look at things like manufacturing processes. A lot of times the manufacturing process might be documented in a PDF or a Word doc or something like that, stored in a file share, but it also might be in a workflow of application or part of some sort of program or industrial, embedded device or something like that. We need to understand that so that we can put the proper controls in place to help protect those type of things. And we need to follow up and ask the right questions till we drill down to, all right, well, what is the business risk behind something like this? And also, if there's any regulations that we need to understand. We want to understand how the users actually interact with the line of business, right? How do they do their jobs and so forth? Because that's how we understand the risk and threats and so forth. If I'm a bad guy, a hacker, and I want to get into something, I want to get information, well, the best way for me to do that is to understand, well, how does the end user access the information, right? So then how can I turn it on its side and ask the questions a little bit differently to get all the information and so forth. So I want to document and drill down into the actual risk statements for my line of business. And if I look at this a little bit further, I really want to drive the riches and ruins into the business risk. I want to know the impact, right? So if I were to lose something, what is the impact? Well, again, in the case of my dad's $800 parts car, if someone were to steal the whole thing, it's $800, plus he didn't have to clean up his yard for that particular car. So man, I'm calling it a wash at that point. But you have to understand if a database has got, $20,000 worth of assets in it or $2 million worth of assets in it. I want to drive that. So that's my security and compliance organization. I want to understand the threat. I also want to understand the sustainable compliance standpoint, right, for my regulations for audit and so forth. I then want to drive those into, my gaps in my controls. Okay, so to meet this regulation, what controls do I actually need to have in place, what reporting, and so forth, so that I can drive that to my IT leadership in a strategic plan. On the business risk, I want to drive that into, my threat statements, what vulnerabilities, what threat vectors can they actually deploy or employ to gain access to those, and what are the likelihoods, right? Some things, it's just not likely that someone's going to come by and want to steal a part off of a 25-year-old MG that's rusted in my father's car. So from this, some of the key ideas that we want to look at are making sure that we're involving the key executives from the line of business, right? So that they help us educate the executives in the budgeting and planning process, so they understand what's at risk, what's the cost of not doing this, versus just saying, okay, well, I'm going to just leave everything wide open, or conversely try to build the best wall that I can just to protect everything. And one of the key things here is putting together a strategic plan that matches the additive budgets that I need. I need to be able to get that budget based on business problems, business risk, versus just saying, hey, I need a new web gateway because it's the new shiny thing and I need a new web gateway. So, in summary, the failure of security design is not lighting into the business, right? I can put the best controls that I can afford in place, and I'm building the best, prettiest wall. But eventually, unless I've got 30% of the IT budget, I'm going to run out of money, and I'm going to have to prioritize things. And eventually, I'm not going to put the right controls in place. And I need to improve enterprise security visibility, right? I need to make sure that I'm educating people on what the security department's doing, what we're stopping, and what we're having to do to mitigate and remediate issues when we do that. And finally, and I mentioned this earlier, it's not always you know, what you ask for, but a lot of times it's how you ask for it. All right. So guys, that's what I had. I went through in about 40 minutes. I think I had 50. So if y'all have any questions, you know, feel free to shout them out now.